Welcome to my new series on real-life ancient horror tales that should be made into horror movies. I've got some evil kings and queens who historically existed in ancient times that did some horrific and incredible deeds that should be on camera for the horror fan. Let's get into it. I don't know why Hollywood refuses to do something so out-of-the-box extraordinary like reading a book, but the world is tired of sequels and prequels and remakes. I'm not saying that when one of these categories aren't done well, that it can't give us a whole new perspective from the original and bring the new modern version into its own world. But let's consider this. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. In other words, stop it, please. I'll be going over some ancient horror figures that Hollywood needs to take a serious look at and do us all a favor and give us something new. I don't know how many countless times my mom has said to me that all these great stories in the Bible are destined to be made. All of these stories on the History Channel are only giving us 2% of the world's conquering backstories of ancient kings and queens. A lot of them did unspeakable acts to gain this power. If this ain't a start to a new horror movie franchise, then I don't know what is. I know we have long gone past the age where there used to be a cast of thousands. That expression is almost lost among the generations after me because they've never seen what that looks like. All they get is a Lord of the Rings masterpiece through computer graphics. Sure, they employ actors maybe in the 50s, even 100s, but never 1,000 when it used to be a spectacle to do. World history and myths are filled with epic conquests and invasions. To reflect the scale of these legendary empires and their battles, several directors have created films that boasted cast of thousands. Ben-Hur, made in 1959, the biblical epic recreates the nativity, the crucifixion, and a thundering chariot race as it recounts the tale of Jewish prince Judah Ben-Hur, who lives in Judea with his family during the time that Jesus Christ was becoming known for his teachings. Braveheart, made in 1995, William Wallace, played by Mel Gibson, sets out to avenge the deaths of his Scottish relatives by raising an army and taking on the might of the English. Gladiator, made in 2000, thrilling action and Russell Crowe's Oscar-winning performance drive the 2000 Academy Award Best Picture Award winner that tells the story of a Roman general who is enslaved and forced to become a gladiator after he clashes with the emperor's bloodthirsty son. And then we have The Ten Commandments. No one can ever forget this epic, made in 1956. Cecil B. DeMille's film boasts an all-star cast and Oscar-winning special effects. The story relates the life of Moses from the time he was discovered in the bulrushes as an infant by the Pharaoh's daughter to his long struggle to free the Israelites from slavery, including his climb up Mount Sinai to receive the tablets containing God's commands. The film features a classic cinematic treasure, the recreation of the parting of the Red Sea. Here are my top suggestions of a cast of thousands, and they are all ancient horror stories that can be told. Imagine a lot of horrific and gory war scenes or demonic magic possessions with these pagan kings and queens. Imagine the horror of the kill count with just these handful of suggestions alone. We start with Ashurbanipal. Ashurbanipal was popular among his people, but merciless when dealing with enemies. Born in 685 BC to 631 or 627 BC, scholars still are not sure about his death date. The fifth son of Esarhaddon, who ruled Mesopotamia and Egypt. He was a cruel Assyrian king from ancient Mesopotamia born in Nineveh. His obsession with collecting knowledge led him to construct the Royal Library of Ashurbanipal, also known as the Royal Library at Nineveh, which has been referred to by H.G. Wells as the most precious source of historical material in the world. It was the world's first systematic, organized library. He was obsessed with ancient tablets and wanted to have copies of every known text ever written. Only mentioned once in the Holy Bible's Book of Ezra, chapter 4, verse 10, he is called a snapper in some versions of the Bible, like the KJV, and then mentioned by his actual name, Ashurbanipal, and others like the NIV. I had already heard of the Assyrians' brutality, but this guy took it to a whole other level. Thank God it didn't last for long. Here's an actual writing made by the merciless king himself. Like the onset of a terrible hurricane, I overwhelmed Elam in its entirety. I cut off the head of Tumen, their king, the haughty one, who plotted evil. Countless of his warriors I slew. Alive with my hands I seized his fighters. With their corpses I filled the plain about Susa as with Baltu and Ashku. Their blood I let run down the Ulai. Its water I dyed red like wool. If you can't get any good imagery from this horror scene, then you're not a horror fan. Movies are all about the fantasy aspect of corpses floating down the river. Well, Ashurbanipal did this in real life and wrote about it. The epic battle scene alone and a kill count can make this story into a great scene. His brother, who was the king of Babylon, conspired to kill him and sent aid to a warring neighbor in Elam, but Ashurbanipal found out and led to a civil war in 652 BC. Babylon fell in 648 BC, but his brother either burned himself alive or was set on fire in the end. Let's cue Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. When Ashurbanipal discovered the plot, he laid siege to Babylon for 2 years. There were horrific stories of people eating their own children to survive starvation. His quote, "As for the rest of the people, those still alive, I myself now laid flat those people there as a funerary offering. I fed their dismembered flesh to dogs, pigs, vultures, eagles, birds of the heavens, and fish of the Apsu waters." Yeah, that's brutal. He devastated the palace of Elam. Scholars believe it was pure genocide. He left nothing standing and took all the treasure out of its cities. He enjoyed torturing defeated kings, placing a chain in the jaw of a king and forcing him to live in a dog kennel for the rest of his life. We've seen that a lot in a lot of horror movies. He claimed to have killed the Elamite king and his son with his own sword, but in reality, he was not at the battle, but at home in safety of his palace. Elamite king's head was brought back to the palace in Nineveh, where it was hung from a tree in the garden as a decoration. Most people would see this as a very clear warning. Don't mess with Ashurbanipal. This scene reminds me of Vlad the Impaler poking and putting heads on spikes impaled right in front of his front door. Another quote from Ashurbanipal: "With the help of Ashur, the patron god of Assyria, and Ishtar, I killed them. Their heads I cut off in front of each other." That is brutal and awesome in imagery if you are a horror fan. He is one of only 4 Neo-Assyrian kings alongside Esarhaddon, Tilgath-Pileser III, and Ashurbanipal II, who in their inscriptions claim to have killed civilians, including live flaying, dismemberment, and impalement. There are also several instances where he is recorded to have brought captive enemies to Nineveh to enthusiastically torture and humiliate them. Women were rarely depicted being harmed in Assyrian artwork, but Ashurbanipal's reliefs include some prominent exceptions to this rule. One of the reliefs from Ashurbanipal's palace in Nineveh, given the modern designation BM 124927, includes both dead female bodies and direct attacks against women. The middle part of the relief includes the most brutal act against a woman ever recorded in an Assyrian relief: Assyrian soldiers ripping open a pregnant Arab woman. He accomplished keeping these ancient records in the library until it was destroyed and buried in 612 BC at the Battle of Nineveh. It lay beneath the rubble until 1849 AD, when English archaeologist Sir Austin Henry Maynard, along with Hormuzd Ramson and translations made by George Smith, brought to light a world which no one up until that time was aware of. They discovered and brought back about 30,000 tablets, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, a version of the flood story that predated the Bible. Ashurbanipal has also made occasional appearances in popular culture in various media. Robert E. Howard wrote a short story entitled The Fire of Ashurbanipal, first published in the December 1936 issue of Weird Tales magazine, about an accursed jewel belonging to a king of long ago, whom the Grecians called Sardanapalus, and the Semitic people's Ashurbanipal. Howard wrote Conan the Barbarian just to give you a hint at the fantasy horror epic stories written at the time. That same magazine also featured horror stories by H.P. Lovecraft, with The Call of Cthulhu, Ray Bradbury, and in all, Weird Tales reprinted 20 poems and stories by Edgar Allan Poe. The Murders in the Rue Morgue was the first. These 3 were the most famous and influential horror writers of all time. The Mesopotamians, a 2007 song by They might be giants. Ashurbanipal was used as the ruler of the Assyrians in the computer game Civilization V. Ashurbanipal once more entered the global spotlight and garnered increased fame in 2018 when reliefs from his reign were exhibited at the British Museum in the exhibition I Am Ashurbanipal. In an inscription on a cylinder dated to 648, Ashurbanipal used the following titles: I am Ashurbanipal, the great king, the mighty king, king of the universe, king of Assyria, king of the 4 regions of the world, offspring of the loins of Esarhaddon, king of the universe, king of Assyria, viceroy of Babylon, king of Sumer and Akkad, grandson of Sennacherib, king of the universe, king of Assyria. Love yourself much? A longer variant is presented on one of Ashurbanipal's building inscriptions in Babylon. It reads, Ashurbanipal, the mighty king, king of the universe, king of Assyria, king of the 4 regions of the world, king of kings, unrivaled prince, who from the upper to the lower sea holds sway and has brought in submission at his feet all rulers, son of Esarhaddon, the great king, the mighty king, king of the universe, king of Assyria, viceroy of Babylon, king of Sumer and Akkad, grandson of Sennacherib, the mighty king, king of the universe, king of Assyria am I. Whew. With all that much talk, I don't see how the announcer can get everything in. I don't know how anyone remembered any of these names, but they did. When someone talks about having a complex, this is it. Thanks for watching and learning about real-life ancient horror stories. Tune in next time, and hopefully Hollywood can turn these into epic horror movies in our lifetime.